So I can see people joining. We're just at 1 o'clock now, so I'm guessing we should just go ahead and start since we're lucky to have you here. The session's being recorded. I hope that's okay, Jake. We want to share it for people who couldn't manage.
That's fine with me.
Cool.
I'll see if I can share my screen.
I might need to.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I might need to make you host.
Yeah,
you can?
it looks like I am able to.
You can. Yeah.
Okay, can you see my cursor moving?
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Jake Halperin. I'm from Libris technical support, specifically the infrastructure support team, and we specialize in authentication. I apologize in advance, but you're going to be seeing my profile for a lot of the time now. I adapted a pre-existing presentation, and I adapted it for the occasion for which we're meeting now, is to talk about the upcoming SP certificate that's about to expire, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means. And I guess I'll take questions at the end, unless something is very unclear, and then just feel free to jump in. So let's see if I can get this PowerPoint going. All right, can you see my slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is SSO and SAML, and I'm going to try to speed through that to get to the interesting bits, and then what we need to do, what customers need to do to update the SP certificate that's about to expire. I assume most people who are here, or everybody who's here, has a certificate that's about to expire at the end of this week. And then just a little bit about how you can debug this on your own before you contact us for support. So I'm really just going to speed through this part. So login is based on two processes. There's authentication, which is trying to figure out if the person is who they say they are, and there's authorization, which is assuming that you are who you say you are. What are your, if we're talking about Alma, what are your roles, right? What should you be allowed to access? For our purposes, we'll be talking about the authentication part of login. That's the part that SAML takes care of. And the authorization is not really a part of this, except that specifically in Alma, when login doesn't work, it's the usual error message is user is not authorized in Alma, but it's actually the message you'll see, and it can be a million and one different things. It's always the same message. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. These are the abbreviations: authentication, authorization. So this is why we need SSO, right? This poor student or university staff member doesn't want a million passwords. They don't want to remember a million passwords, and they certainly don't want to reuse a password, because that's not good practice either. So so we need SSO. And what is SSO? It's single sign-on. It's the service. It's being able to authenticate once per session, per browser session, and then being logged into all of the services that rely on that authentication. And there are different protocols to provide this functionality, and one of the popular ones is SAML, and that's the one that we're going to be focusing on. And this is the flow, and it's important to understand this flow. It says Primo here, but it could be Alma, and it could be just, let's call it the application. And what happens when you try to authenticate to the application, what happens with the SAML flow is that the application will redirect you to, let's call it for now, the authentication authority. And this is a server on your campus, probably. And you got redirected in the browser. And this is where you'll authenticate. If you haven't already signed in, this is your first time in this session, you'll be prompted for your username and password. You'll be authenticated against the institution's authentication authority. It's not really called that. And if you've already authenticated in this session, you won't be prompted to enter your credentials again. You'll just be redirected back. Either way, you're authenticated and you're redirected back to the application with some kind of at least one identifying, whether it's a username or an email or something that uniquely identifies you. And then you're back in the application and you're logged in. So if we're talking about this using the SAML terminology, the application is known as the service provider, or SP. And where you authenticate is called the identity provider. And what SAML does is it governs the communication. There's a login request in a specific format, and then a login response saying that the user is authenticated. So SAML is a standard that specifies what these messages should look like. And the ML in SAML, SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, and that ML should be a hint that it's all XMLs. This is kind of what it looks like. There's a lot of specifics here, a lot of technical details. For example, the issuer here will be if this is a SAML response, for example, from the IDP, then the issuer here will be the entity ID, which is a globally unique identifier that identifies the IDP. And just a little bit about how do we trust these SAML messages, right? Because in order for this to be secure, you need to know that the authentication request and then the authentication response coming back from the IDP, we need to know, we need to be able to trust those messages to know that they haven't been tampered with by some hacker. And this uses public key cryptography, the same kind that's used for SSL, even though SAML is not the same as SSL, but it uses the same type of X509 certificate. And the way these certificates are used is each party has a private key and a public key. So you use your private key to sign a message, but anyone can use your public key to verify your signature. And similarly, you can also use the certificates, this same public key infrastructure for encryption. Now, encrypting messages in SAML is not required, but some people choose to. It's all over HTTPS anyway, so there's no need to encrypt it. But some customers, some IDPs will want to encrypt their messages. So that's similarly that also relies on certificates. You use the recipient's public key to encrypt the message, and then the recipient uses their private key to decrypt it. So what all of this means is that setting up the SAML integration relies on exchanging metadata. And the metadata includes what I said, what I called the entity ID, which is a globally unique identifier for each entity, whether it's the SP or the IDP, and the URLs that these SAML messages need to be sent to, and the certificates. So what that means is when we're setting up SAML for the first time, say, let's say we want SAML authentication to Alma against the customer's IDP, which could be Shibboleth or ADFS or Azure, or there are a bunch of other popular options. So what we usually do is we give the customer the Alma SP metadata for them to register on the IDP. And similarly, we take the IDP metadata and we put that in the SAML profile on Alma. On the Alma side, it's usually enough to have one profile, and then you can use that for all the what we call the higher education platform products, Alma Primo VE, Leganto, Esploro, if you have it. They can all piggyback the one profile that you created. And the requirement there is for the IDP metadata to be the same. Now, this will vary from one IDP to another, but from my experience, it's usually with Microsoft Azure that the IDP is not the same. Specifically, the IDP signing certificate is often different for each product, which means that in those cases, you'll have a separate SAML profile for each of the products. But I would say in the typical case, it's enough to have one SAML profile in Alma, and then that's used by all of the products. And on the other hand, on the IDP side, you would have a separate relying party, it's sometimes called, or a separate application representing the product. So, for example, if you're the IDP admin, if you're the campus Shibboleth admin, let's say, you'll have metadata for Alma, and then a separate relying party with its own metadata for Primo, and the same for Leganto and the other products. And now getting to the key event that's coming up, and I think the reason that's brought us all together today is that in the SAML profile, and I will say this, the SAML profile in Alma can be just a little bit confusing because it's full of IDP metadata. You populate the IDP login URL, and then later the IDP certificate, and then in the middle of all of that, you have this, and here is where you select the SP certificate. So that's the service provider certificate. So that's the certificate that belongs to Alma, and it could be used by the other products, as I just mentioned. And so I would say that the first common trap that I would mention that you want to avoid is knowing that the SP certificate is about to expire. It's important to find the correct. I think I should have had a bigger screenshot here, just to see it in context. But it's important to not confuse the SP certificate with the IDP certificate, because they're both fields in the SAML profile. So where it says Alma metadata file version is what we'll need to update. Now, if you're here, what you probably see here is the signed certificate that's about to expire on April 7th. And as a side note, I'll just say that so the next signed certificate that's available is I think is good until January 2024. But it's important to say that self-signed certificates are good enough for SAML. So I think many of us, the difference between a self-signed certificate and what we call a signed certificate, or a CA signed certificate, signed by a certificate authority, is that the signed certificates, you sort of they're good for SSL. Like when you go to wikipedia.org, you want to know that you're not the victim of a man-in-the-middle attack, and that you're really communicating with wikipedia.org and not an imposter. It's important to use certificates that are signed by trusted certificate authorities. And the difference between that and what we're doing here with SAML is that when we set up these SAML profiles initially, your institution, the ex Libris and the customer, we communicated via email or on web sessions. So there's no danger there. The trust is already there. I'm not explaining it very well, but the bottom line is that SAML doesn't require signed certificates, and because the self-signed certificate that we offer has a longer an expiration date that's farther away in the future, it's our recommendation to choose the self-signed certificate, which is good till the end of 2025. And so I think the moment we've all been waiting for is, so what do we need to do this week? So the short, simple answer is go to the SAML profile, select this version 2025 for the Alma metadata file version, and that will switch to the new SP certificate. And roughly at the same time, on the other side of this, the campus IDP admin needs to update the SP metadata on the IDP side. And the new metadata with the new certificate is available from a URL such as this one, where all you would need to change is the base URL. So instead of what it says here, my univ, it would be your dedicated Alma URL. And then if you're also doing this for Primo, then it would be your university's Primo base URL. And I guess at this point, I should explain something that's not obvious. I guess this is unique to Ex Libris products, but when you go to Alma or any of our products, it's the same for Primo VE, and you click login, and it builds a SAML authentication request and sends you to the IDP. It will use the URL. It will rely on the base URL in your browser's address bar to build the SAML message, to build the SAML request. So the entity ID, and the reason I bring this up is because each customer these days has a dedicated URL like this. So for example, if I'm Harvard, I can access my Alma at harvard.alma.exlibrisgroup.com. But that's also an alias for a generic server name, which could be na01.alma, or in many of our UK customers instances, it's also possible to access your Alma going to EU or perhaps EU01.alma.exlibrisup.com, and then you'll probably also need to specify your institution later on in the URL. And if you were an early adopter of Alma, it's very possible that you still access Alma by going to EU.alma. And the best practice, what we recommend, is to always use the dedicated URL, the institution-specific domain name. And some customers have mentioned that this was never communicated to them. When this shift took place, when it was no longer recommended to use EU.alma, there was no proper communication, and that's and those customers probably raise a good point. I'm not here to comment on that, but I'm here to talk about what the current situation is, and what, in my opinion, is the best way to move forward. So I know that making changes like having everybody change their bookmarks in the middle of an academic year is not something that's easy to do, or probably not something that you would want to do, but it is something to keep in mind. And the relevance to SAML is what I just said. So if you go to it could be, how do I go back? Whatever, I'm not going to go back, but the point is that if you go to harvard.alma or na.alma, it'll take you to the same place, but the behavior with regard to SAML will not be the same. So the SAML message, the SAML login request that gets built will rely on whatever base URL is entered in your browser's address bar. And what this means is that, for example, if you have a custom domain for Primo, then the IDP admin will need to update the metadata for that SP specifically, with the entity ID corresponding to your custom domain, and not your ex libris domain for Primo. I hope I made that clear enough, but if you have...
No, that was definitely clear, Jake.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. So really, in the simple case, that's all you need to do. All you need to do is make sure that that you've coordinated a time to meet with your IDP admin, that you were able to obtain the new metadata from the URL that I shared, and I can paste that into the chat later. But it should also be available in our documentation and also through the SAML profile. But there's one extra complication, and that is, so some customers will prefer not to exchange metadata directly, but share metadata on a metadata aggregator, what we usually call a federation. And this is, I'll tell you what my understanding of this is, and I'm not pretending to have a full picture here, but I think the usual benefits of going through a federation are that if you change your phone number you don't want to have to contact every person you know and give them your new phone number. Let's say if you're a business, right? You want to update it in one place. You'll update your website, and then everybody can get the new phone number from there. So this is kind of like that. What these federations do is, let's say when either side, whether it's the IDP or the SP, when they need to update their metadata, and this will, the only thing that really changes in the metadata is certificates because they have expiration dates. So the idea with these federations is that you post the new metadata in the federation, and then everybody can get it from there. And this makes a lot of sense. The only problem is that the current design of Alma does not support any of this. And I'll try to explain. I'll try to explain why. So for one thing, Alma doesn't have. There's no option. When I say monitoring metadata URLs is not supported in either direction, what I mean is when the IDP metadata updates, the IDP switches to a new certificate, the IDP might make that information available in a metadata URL, but for the moment, there's no feature in Alma that will monitor that URL. So there's no getting away from the fact that you'll need to update the new IDP metadata in the SAML profile in Alma. And similarly, when you switch, it's true that you can get the Alma SP metadata from a URL, but it will always be a different URL for different metadata. And I'm not sure why it was designed this way. And I believe that over time we will offer better support for this kind of flow, because when it's there, it probably makes life a lot easier. But I'm here to talk about what is and not what ought to be. So for the moment, let's say there's one metadata URL that contains the metadata with the April 7th certificate, and then the new certificate, the 2025 certificate, that can be found in a different Alma SP metadata URL. Specifically, it's a different parameter at the end of the URL. It's version equals version 2025. And so even if your IDP works seamlessly with the federation, and it periodically fetches new metadata every 24 hours or every hour, I don't know. And even if the federation is very good about frequently refreshing metadata from SPs, the way Alma is currently designed is that it'll never be picked up. If you switch to a new SP certificate in Alma, it will never be picked up by the federation. If you just wait for that to happen, your login will just stop working, because I don't know if I mentioned this. I really should emphasize this. When I said earlier that you need to update, you need to select the new certificate and also update the SP metadata on the IDP at roughly the same time. That's because login will not work as long as those two things are not synced. So every time there's a metadata change on one side, it needs to be reflected on the other side. And the last thing I can say about these federations is that, given that there's no getting away from manual updates, the way it works with the federations is, if the customer insists, and some customers have insisted that we, instead of registering SP metadata directly on their IDP, they would like us to publish the new metadata on the federation and then wait for that to propagate to their IDP. Fine, that's possible, but that means that downtime, instead of being 2 seconds, it might be, I can't even comment on how long it might take. It could take a couple of hours, or maybe a couple of business. I mean, maybe it could take a couple of days. You know, it depends on how long it takes the federation to process the request, and then how long it takes for the change to propagate for the IDP to pick up the change. So this is my understanding of working with federations, and then my bottom line is, at the current moment, given the design, I would just recommend exchanging metadata directly. This is what we recommend when we set up SAML for the first time for a customer. And in a situation like this, where we need to update SP metadata, if you are the IDP admin, or if you have some sway with the IDP admin, it's better to, in order to avoid downtime that's longer than necessary, it's better to update the SP metadata directly on the IDP. And I think that most IDPs will allow you to do this. Even if you normally rely on federation metadata, it should be possible to update the SP metadata directly in a way that overrides anything coming in from the federation. And then my last piece of advice before opening a support case is to use, you can get a lot of helpful debugging information if, let's say you tried to make this change on the profile, and then login stopped working, and you're not sure why, because all you can see is that frustrating message, user is not authorized in Alma. Then take your regular login URL, add this parameter to the URL, which I'll paste in the chat in a minute, and then paste all of that into a new incognito window, and then log in as normal. It should show you a lot of technical details, a lot of debugging information that will be useful to you or to the IDP admin. And specifically, if we're talking about, and you should see any error that's causing login to break, but specifically in our context here, if there should be a message there saying that the metadata, the SP metadata on the IDP doesn't match the certificate version, the Alma metadata file version that's selected in the Alma SAML profile. And it will also say assertion decryption failed, because that specifically is the first thing that breaks. If the certificate doesn't match and the IDP is configured to encrypt part of the SAML response, then Alma won't be able to decrypt it, because it'll try to use the wrong private key, and login won't work. And in that case, you'll see the message assertion decryption failed. Make sure that the SP version selected in the profile matches the SP metadata on the IDP. And the reason I recommend an incognito window is that as soon as you use this test mode equals true parameter once, it's sort of sticky, and then the next time you try to just log in normally to Alma, it'll still, your browser will still remember this, and you'll have to clear your browsing data, probably clear your cookies. So that's why it's just easier to do it in an incognito window. And then if you're not sure about your specific situation, if you have questions, if you run into any difficulties, we're always happy to help. My team is infra support. And if you know that you have a SAML issue, you can include in the description that it should be routed to infra support. But just to make sure that it's routed correctly. But if you have the word SAML in there, you can be pretty sure that it'll be routed to infra support. And our 24/7 hub for system downs also knows who to page. And let's hope we don't need this, but I think it's good to know that we're always available. And this is another debugging tool. I don't know if this will be helpful to customers. We use it a lot. If the IDP is not configured to encrypt the SAML response, then this can also be helpful. But there are many other extensions like this that you can add to your favorite browser, and then this helps with the you can see the actual SAML message. And I think maybe the last thing that I'll say about this is that if you did make a change to the SP certificate and login broke and you're not sure why, and you are the IDP admin, maybe while you're waiting for support to figure it out and give you some direction, maybe you can temporarily disable encryption, which again is not a requirement in SAML. And then maybe in the meantime, you'll still have working login. And I think I'm ready to take questions, and in the meantime, I'll also paste some of those helpful URLs in the chat.
That's great, Jake. Thanks. That answered quite a few of my questions, especially about the UK Federation. Makes perfect sense now. And we had questions from our internal IDP folks as to why we needed so many URLs registered with them. And you've answered that as well. We just do, because we have 6 different services, 3 live and 3 sandbox. So I can go back to them and say that. So that's good. Can we open it up for anyone else for questions? And if you want to do it audibly, you're very welcome, or paste them in the chat or raise your hand. Do we have chat? Chris.
I was just going to say thank you to Jake for walking us through it. We're going to sort of swap hours tomorrow morning, hopefully, all things being well. It just take a bit of time to get agreement with our IT services to swap the IDP certificate. We are an early adopter, and we are one of the awkward ones that want to keep the EU.alma at least until the end of the year. So fingers crossed it all goes well. It's probably a more convoluted question, but when talking about this, it did just make me realise actually that although it's the ALMA SP, I actually think Primo SP, we got back out Office Primo is set up in a slightly different way in terms of how strict it is about certificates, which I've just realised. But that's a by the by. Thank you for that. That was very clear. Fingers crossed tomorrow morning it goes well. I'll report back.
Good luck.
Well, it's working for us, and we're still on the old EU01. I think you probably hand a hand in looking at that, Jake.
Could be.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? I can't believe we don't have questions.
Well, that means that everything was super clear.
Absolutely. Just what I was going to say.
Yeah, the only thing I'd sort of ask is, maybe it's worth saying, or without, unless it makes it too convoluted, is can you say something about the ALMA, standalone ALMA, Primo VE, Primo back office? They are all different SPs, is that correct? In that sense, they should have different IDP presences.
So you said ALMA, you said Primo VE, you said Primo back office, and what was the other one?
Well, I suppose actually Leganto, but effectively Leganto and Elma are sort of the same-ish, depending on how you set up the URL, I suppose, and how you brand your service. But I think I was thinking more, back in time, there's the standalone Alma, standalone Primo, and people, authenticate. I think sometimes the Primo bit causes some confusion just because of the way it gets data. You sign into Primo via Shibboleth, but actually gets data from Alma.
Right. So the only thing that comes to mind when you mention those separate products is that Primo back office does not really exist in Primo VE. So if you have a relying party for Primo back office, so I mean, I can't think of a reason why you would have anything SAML related for Primo back office.
Well, in the authentication manager, you can set up, or at least it allows you to set up a login. Ours certainly did, and it appears to have different SP presence.
So
the Primo administrative, we had the same. We had one until we moved to Primo V. So it's not a public facing thing. It's like the Alma one, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I don't mean the back office itself. So I mean just to differentiate, the the sort of topology, if you like, the model, the fact that you can sign in as a user into Primo.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You know what I mean? It's not Primo VE in that sense.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So are you asking if you would need a SAML relying party for that?
Yeah, it's just the certificates, really. I mean, to be honest, I actually think the back office Primo, the way the authentication manager works, it's not as clear as it is in Alma that a certificate's actually ever expired when you first look at it. But that might be a separate question. So I don't want to get bogged down in that, don't worry. But it just struck me when I looked back at the authentication manager with our hosted Primo sort of back office.
And you use Primo Classic, right? Not
yes,
VE.
Yeah. Primo Classic is what I mean by back office.
Yeah. This is making more sense. So I think we already have an email thread going, Chris, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think we'll take it offline because
I
think most customers are probably on VE.
Yeah, probably. That's fair.
Okay.
I have one other question related sort of to this, but it's not really. We have one. We all have one SAML profile in Alma as a default. We had looked at having a separate logout URL for different services, so have a different one for Leganto and a different one for Primo V, and we never managed to get that to work correctly. Is it an option, Jake, to be able to do that?
Specifically, if you want different configurations, or I should say, broadly speaking, if you want different configurations for your different products, then there should be no problem in creating as many separate profiles as you want. You have a separate profile for Leganto with its own specific configurations. But I should also say that there's a lot to be said about the way the logout URL works, and I think that's kind of outside the scope of this meeting. But there's if you want the logout behavior, if you want the logout to behave a specific way and redirect you to a specific page when logging out, that has more to do with IDP configurations than it does with with anything on the Alma side. But please open a support case and we'll.
Okay. Sorry, there are two other questions in the chat. So Julie, we have the 2025 metadata version already selected in the integration profile, but the expiry date for the IDP cert is 27/5 May 2023. Do we need to go to SHIB provider to get this updated?
Yes. So the IDP certificate is completely unrelated, but it's the same idea. If it expires, you'll need to update it, and login will probably break if you don't. But your Shibboleth admin will probably update it anyway. So the IDP will switch over to a new certificate. And if you don't also update the SAML profile in Alma, then login will break. But happily, there is a way to do this seamlessly with no downtime. You can specifically for the IDP certificate, which is different from what we've been talking about here. You can upload your upcoming certificate as a secondary certificate, and then the rollover will be seamless.
Sorry, was this in the IDP side, Jake? No, in the Alma SAML profile.
In the Alma SAML profile, yeah, you'll need to get the new certificate from your IDP administrator.
Yeah.
And as soon as you have that, you'll need to upload it as a secondary certificate. And if you're not sure, then please, by all means, open a support case.
Julie says that makes sense, and I think it does. I was just being a bit stupid. So Chris Langham has a question. Do you want to unmute?
Yes, I have done. Thanks. My original question was exactly the same as Julie's, actually, but what I've got you mentioned earlier about only having one SAML certificate, Jake. We've got a separate one for our Premium Sandbox. Is that correct? We've got two SAML profiles in live. Is that the usual configuration?
I mean, it makes sense. If you use Alma Premium Sandbox, then that's a different base URL, right? It'll be myuniv-psb probably .alma.
Yes.
And then you'll have a separate relying party on your IDP for that. And then everything we said in this meeting will need to be done in exactly the same way for the Premium Sandbox. But it's its own it's as if it's its own product.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that, Jake.
Sure. Yeah. And again, I'd like to mention again to everybody, if you're not sure, or if your situation might be unique, or if it needs a closer look, then our team is always happy to help. It's better to take a look at these things as much time in advance as possible, obviously.
Perfect. Any more questions? We've got 10 minutes or so if anyone has any burning questions to cover with Jake. It's good to know about the federation. We discussed it on our customer list, and some people are using it, and that's as you've explained, it works perfectly, but it doesn't automatically update. So we are responsible for updating the certificate in the UK Federation area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see any more coming in. Oh, how do I check the IDP cert expiry date? Our SAML date is fine in Alma.
The IDP certificate expiry date. So as of a couple of years ago, in the Alma SAML profile, in the IDP certificate section, it should show you the IDP expiry date. And I think the only exception is if it's a very old certificate and it's been there since before the feature was developed, then you can't really see it, and also you can't really download it. But if you use one of the debugging tools that I mentioned, one of the SAML tracers, then you can see the certificate that's being used by the IDP to sign the SAML response, or you can ask your IDP admin.
That's really useful. Thanks, Jake. And the test mode equals true. We'll definitely be using that one, I think. Anyone else? We've still got 5 minutes or so. Make the most of Jake while we've got him. No.
All right.
Well, thank you, Jake. Thank you so much for doing this for us so quickly. We really appreciate taking the time.
My pleasure.
It's been really useful, I reckon, I hope everyone thought so. Yeah. So
Great.
yeah, you probably get no calls this week now because everything will go smoothly for absolutely everyone.
Hopefully. Good luck to everybody. Thanks for joining.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.